This week, we got a new series from one of Dok's favorite characters, Cable, called Cable Love and Chrome, from David Pepose with Mike Henderson on art. Dok was certain that he was going to hate this comic book. It's our worst of the week review, and he's about to say Wes is right because this thing is not bad at all.
I went in with very, very, very low expectations, and David Pepose managed to exceed them. Now, I hate the name of this title. I know that it's a callback to the original Cable 2-issue miniseries Blood and Chrome, but it also gives me Thor Love and Thunder vibes. Good on him for setting the expectations so fucking low. He only had to just not fall completely on his ass in order to go over that bar.
Well, I think he went way over that bar. I think this is a good comic book. I'm certainly recommending it. And it doesn't belong on a worst of the week, but we had already decided to review it. There are way worse comic books out there. Sam Wilson, Captain America, comes to mind as the absolute worst of the week. But I've been reading Space Ghost, and while I'm not a great David Pepose fan, he seems like a douchebag. But after reading Space Ghost, I was hopeful that this was going to be pretty darn decent. And I think it's actually a really good introduction to the Cable character, what's going on there, what are his trials and tribulations, his motivations. And I think the art from Mike Henderson, while not being perfect, actually suits the book quite well, even though it's a little wonky in some places.
It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. Mike Henderson's a perfectly competent artist. I remember him on a number of other projects. Story-wise, it's fine. Pretty good in parts. But I think he needed a rather mediocre artist, because I don't think he needed it to outshine his writing here, especially considering he's coming in with a pretty abysmal reputation in the eyes of a lot of readers that aren't reading Space Ghost. So he needs something to not overshadow him. And he got that with Mike Henderson here.
The first thing that we get a little bit of an adventure in obviously the future, but we get a breakdown of who Cable is, the fact that he's got the techno-organic virus, the fact that his own telekinesis is fighting that virus 24/7. That's why it hasn't really overtaken him. But he does admit that if he concentrates on other things too much, he could be overcome by it. And I think as an introduction to Cable, not getting so far into the weeds of who Cable is, it is very weird backstory and the fact that he's all over time and who his parents are. I think it's actually does a really good job of getting people ready for Cable if they haven't read the character yet.
It is a solid introduction. He did that kind of classic introduce the character, kind of using the caption boxes. He treated this like it was for a new reader that isn't familiar with Cable. I think it is good to go back to that, treating each comic like it's somebody's first. I had some issues with some of the characterization of Cable, as well as some of the terminology. There's one thing that anybody that has ever read Cable for more than like 3 issues knows: when Cable is going to time slide or body slide, it's body slide by 1, by 2, by 3. He never uses body slide plus 1. That's not the command for his operating system. That's pure and simple. David Pepose doesn't know Cable enough to know that, and his editor doesn't know Cable well enough to catch that. That's the one thing about this that leaves me apprehensive moving forward, because the story itself is pretty good.
He turns out he's fighting against like the second Roxxon war, and they've created like this dirty bomb thing. As he goes in there to kind of disarm the dirty bomb or somehow get rid of it, this character Cicada shows up. They end up having a pretty darn good fight. It really does an admirable job displaying, Cable's powers, what he's capable of, the fact that he never gives up, because at one point it does look like he's taken possibly a finishing blow, but he's able to kind of turn that around in Cicada, and we get a pretty good action-packed, exciting opening to it that really gets you invested in the Cable character.
I'm not familiar with Cicada. I'm assuming that it's a new villain for this series. It kind of drops you that in media res, where he's smoking the shit out of the Asgardian death cult people, and then Cicada shows up and really actually bests Cable. They're going back and forth, but Cable's a little confused that he can't really do any damage to this character.
I thought it was a pretty good introduction to the villain, because we will see him again by the end of the issue, which I thought was a little bit surprising. I thought it was just to demonstrate what he was going to do and then throw him into the time sphere and just have him show up somewhere random. Here's that they're going to be the main villain throughout the miniseries. The place that he lands on by happenstance ends up being like a tiny colony. They're all infected with a techno-organic virus like Cable, and they're kind of fighting against the man. And I thought the techno-organic planet type thing felt very much like out of a Star Trek or something like that, to where you're showing up on this planet. It has some Old West vibes to it. And I thought it was pretty cool. Apparently everyone's addicted to spark, and that's how this corporation keeps these people under their boot, kind of working in their minds and stuff like that.
We're not totally clear on where that is. We know that he starts in 3077, then he goes to the end of time, and then he comes out somewhen. The world that he wakes up in, if you read any of like the original Cable solo series, it very much felt like New Canaan, where he grows up and he's a freedom fighter. Feels like that exact same world, but I mean, I guess there's only so much dystopian Dust Bowl planet that you're going to live on where it's kind of Firefly and slightly influenced by Blade Runner. I've seen that a lot of times throughout Cable and Cable's solo series in the future. It's not too different than the future he grew up in, so I'm not sure why we're supposed to feel like it's someplace completely new for him. Now, I do like the fact that all these people, at least on the ground, are infected by the techno-organic virus, and they have to use this drug that they become addicted to in order to hold it at bay. And it basically forces them into slavery. And it's a pretty decent premise, but at the same time, you're trying to fight for freedom here because she talks about being a freedom fighter and everything. Did nobody think through the fact that once you get your freedom, you're also not going to get the drug that's keeping you from being turned into a phalanx?
Well, that's a good point. Maybe they got to take them over and steal the drugs.
You got to think more than one step ahead. With the people that have the only thing that's keeping you human, how hard are you really going to fight, and how much damage do you really want to do?
I'm a fan of Salvation Bay. I think Cable works very, very well as a space cowboy. We get into the reason that they call it Love and Chrome. This lady, I think her name is Avery. She's pretty badass. It's the first person that he meets. It turns out she owns her own bar. She's got her own armory in the back of the bar. She's the leader of the freedom fighters. Her and Cable seem to get along pretty darn well. They're both kind of soldiers, used to going out there and trying to save people. As they're mowing everybody down, they're kind of flirting with each other. And I thought it was pretty good. I like Cable having a little love interest.
This actually reminded me of, God, what the hell was her name? Jan Scott? I can't remember if I'm pronouncing that right. That was his wife in the future that he has his son Tyler with. Tyler that eventually it starts as Genesis, becomes genocide, and then eventually becomes Holocaust. He has a wife. That was the problem. That was the other thing that I had with this. Whenever they introduced Avery, he looks almost exactly like Cable's wife.
Well, apparently he's got a type.
I expected it to be her whenever she was introduced here. She seems way, way, way too much like his wife. And I think you need to address that at some point during the series. Oh, wait, his first wife was named Aaliyah. But yeah, I think it should be something that's addressed in the plot. I think it would add some layers to it, but that would require David Pepos to know enough about Cable to know that it should be Body Slide by 2 instead of Body Slide +1.
I thought as a cool character that was his sidekick, that's kind of showing that she can hold her own on the battle space, and you could see why Cable would probably be smitten with her in the end. If I was in Salvation Bay and I saw a lady wield an axe like that, I'd probably be into her.
She does look pretty badass with that fucking axe.
Now, during this fight, the forces that are coming against them get a little bit bigger, and all of a sudden we see a tank. And everybody in Salvation Bay thinks that Cable's eating it because it looks like he was run over by the tank. And then he went into the tank, grabbed the big cannon on the front of it, and just started wasting everybody.
She went and kind of impressed him. He went out there and made her want to go bone. Now, granted, at the end, he was like, oh, fuck, that kind of took it out of me. But I am still carrying the fucking gun from a tank that I just blew up another tank with.
That was a pretty cool moment. I thought that was a really good climax for the story to really, as you're moving up to there and the people finally see what Cable is all about. And you can see why he would side with them. He'd want to help them out because they have the same affliction that he does. Obviously, he's impressed with the girl. And then he went out and put his best move out there, which was destroying a tank, taking its cannon and blowing up other tanks with it, which I think was a boss move.
I mean, I liked whenever they went to the armory and she's like, do you know how to handle a particle beam weapon? And he's like, yeah, I think I can figure this out. And then he fucking destroys like a bunch of shit. And I will give this comic credit. It's 2024 and they didn't make him get fucking jobbed out so that he could get saved by the new chick, because there was a lot of opportunity throughout this comic. It was unclear whether he was smitten or if he was doing the current yearism of him being there to be the real character that validates new character. I think he's actually a little smitten, and he also doesn't have to get jobbed out in order for her to decide that this guy's kind of fucking cool.
Oh, he's kind of a badass, all right. And that's when we see that Cicada is also ended up on this planet, but it appears to be missing a leg at this point.
I'm glad that there wasn't just a throwaway villain whose only job it was to get Cable into this future, that he's actually going to be there as a villain to be the foil for Cable. I think that is a good thing. You know, Cable, outside of Strife and Holocaust and Apocalypse, obviously, doesn't have a lot of his own villains.
Me personally, I'm giving a pretty hearty recommend to this one. I would call it a 4 out of 5, an 8 out of 10. Certainly a comic book worth reading. I think it was a great start and easily the best thing to come out of X-Men From the Ashes in Tom Brevoort's office, without question.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it, because this is the first time they've released a good comic. Everything else has been just degrees of bad or just merely competent. This seems to be an actual fairly decent, well done comic. I'd say that this is probably a solid 3.5, 4. It's above average. I don't know if I want to go all the way to 4 on it, but it's a not bad comic. And at no point did I want to throw it away. In fact, every time that I get apprehensive about what was going to happen on the next page because of some of the shit that he, was going on, turns out it's just my, modern year comics PTSD triggering, and where I expected them to go totally current year. And you know what? He just did a decent comic. Now, it could be a Jason Aaron situation where he's lulling me into a false sense of security just so he can punch me in the dick later. But I'll give it a shot, and I actually am going to read the next issue. I actually recommend people buy it.
As do I, and Wes was right on this one. If you would like the fully unedited review and all of Doc's thoughts, because he has lots of thoughts for Cable that we had to cut it down just for the sake of time here on YouTube, you do need to go to Think Critical Patreon. For Doc Unfiltered, you'll get this, as well as our conversation about Jed MacKay and the state of A-list comic book writers at Marvel Comics, available live right now. There is a link in the video description if you'd like to check that out and see if the Think Critical Patreon is the place for you.